Hello everyone, this is Chris Morris, and I'll be going over lesson 6 in our advanced training series. This is going to explain how to set up a count that's been wired into the I/O box for a touch input or a PSM. Essentially today we'll go over what the purpose of a wire count is, and then in order to set this up we have to create what we call a discrete input. And then we have to create a linked sampler for the count. And then there's also another type of sampler or count, which is called continuous, which means it's always on, it's never off. And so we'll go over on how to create that as well. Purpose of a wire count is to obtain the total number made by a machine or sensor input, thus eliminating any human error by doing the manual count. In order to get this to work right, you first have to have a dry contact wired into that I/O box for the touch input or the PSM. There's a picture here that shows, got one that's a little bit bigger here, but shows you here how you got your wires running into DI1. Your dip switch is on because it's dry contact, it needs to get voltage, and basically what that would look like. Alright, so get right into it here. Go ahead and log into VT3000, and we're going to go to configuration, go to devices. I already have a device here that's set up for machine, so we're going to go ahead and edit that one. You can select a new one if that's need be. First thing we got to do is, like I said, we have to set up an input. So we have to turn on that input 1 that we have wired. So basically we're going to select it because it's on input 1. Right now it's disabled. We're going to set it up as a count. We're going to have it enabled. Inverted would just wouldn't really, in other words, like what this is going to do is when it gets a pulse, it's going to make a count, right? So there's no pulse, and then all of a sudden there's a pulse, or no power, and then there's power, and that's how we're going to do this count. Inverted would be the opposite. So there's always power, and then when the power is off, that pulse there, that would be the count. So that's why you would use inverted. On delay and off delay, generally just leave them set to 1 millisecond. So after you get this set, just have to hit save and exit so that it'll create it, and then basically when you go back in and edit it, this time we're going to be going to monitoring points. So we're going to do the first type of count, which is that we have to add it under a process. So it's basically the linked sampler. So basically click on our add sampler, shows up under production. We're going to just go as a count. We said the mode is it's a linked sampler, the type it's a count, trigger periodic. What this means is that every 60 seconds it's going to update the database, right? Just the same thing as we did on a manual button on the module. You can do as occurs. So in other words, it'll update the database on the count every time the count occurs. I'm going to go ahead and set up as periodic. I'm not going to send zeros. So in other words, if there's not a count every 60 seconds, it's not going to send a zero. Next thing we have to do is select the input. So this is the one that we set up, that direct or discrete input number 1. So that is this one right here. That's called DI1, discrete input 1. We've selected it here. You can make it a different color if you want. And basically click off. So now we have a count. It's a linked sampler count. When we start production, then the count will be active. We can select the count. Got that set up. Save and exit. The other type that we could do, let's use the same one here, is a continuous count, which basically, so we'll delete this one, basically means that it's always on. So you basically would set it up in the root, not underneath any alarm or process. I'll call it the count. And the mode is continuous. So it's always on. Same settings, count, periodic, when do you want to update it. The input, once again, drag it discrete input 1. Also zeros, give it a color if you want. And then just click on something here. So now as you can see, everything's on the same level. This count is always on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Basically how you would look at data for it on a panel is by just selecting the schedule. You know, want to see first shift count, second shift count, third shift count. Same applies to a report. We'll see first shift, second shift, third shift. Okay, so let's get that set up. Hit save and exit. And that will conclude our wired setup for a count. Like I said, we wonder what was the purpose of a wired count. You know, we're basically eliminating human errors because we're getting everything direct from a sensor. We created a discrete input. We created a linked count, which is that first one when we put it underneath a process. And then a continuous count is one that's just always on. It doesn't have to be under a process or anything. Practical app. We're saying go ahead and create a discrete input, set it up as a count, add a linked periodic count, add a linked as occurs count, and then you can do a continuous periodic and a continuous as occurs count. Additional information, there's the overall VT3000 wiki. There's overview pages on discrete inputs, samplers, and then there's a how-to guide. So wired input connection. So that's basically how to wire it into the I/O module. And then this is add a wired input, which is exactly what we just did, basically within the software. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.